All right. So today we're going to learn about histology. And histology is essentially just the microscopic study of tissues. And as we learn about tissues, we learn a lot about this a lot microscopically on a cellular level. It's important to understand here. So we think about this, tissues are essentially work in aggregate. It's a group of cells with a common embryonic origin. So as you are being formed in your mother's belly. All this is coming together on a cellular level of what makes you you and how all of these tissues come together in aggregate to function together and really a perfect way so that you can have kind of a normal, a neurotypical aspect to who you are, regular functioning. I always say that in order for you to function, say just generally typically, a lot of miraculous things have to happen. And on a cellular level with tissues, this is a truly important process to understand. So we're going to talk about that. Again, histology is the microscopic study of tissues. And within our tissues, we're also looking at cellular junctions. So these are like connections between cells. Think about many highways or connections between the cells, anchored to each other and to a cellular matrix as well with that. So there's communication that happens with this. And why is there communication? Well, there has to be communication to understand what, so we can function properly together. Again, the majority of our body works in aggregate. Everything's communicating with each other so that we can have functioning where there's always communication. So you didn't think communication is just for the outward version of you and with other people. That communication is happening really without your knowledge on a regular basis inside your body right now. While I'm talking right now, there's so many things happening in neuromuscular synaptic junctions, the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and all these different incredible aspects that are going on to make us do what we do. For me to move my hand like this, there are electrical signals that are going on from my brain, right, to the central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, to allow me to just to do this within a blink of an eye. It's truly incredible for that. So that communication is really important, and those cellular junctions are very tight communications. They're very tightly packed together for that. So the gap junction is really for communication. Okay, so the channel between cells, these transmembrane proteins, they're arranged a lot like segments, kind of around like an orange around a water-filled channel, if you could think about it that way. You have ions, nutrients, and other small solutes that pass through this connection process that you see here. And the gap junction are mainly located in cardiac smooth muscle, embryonic tissue, the lens, and also the cornea in the eye. So when we're studying histology, we're looking at four basic tissues, right? So we're looking at epithelial tissue, connective tissue, nervous tissue, and muscular tissue. I'll say this again. We're looking at epithelial tissue, connective tissue, nervous tissue, muscle tissue, and we will go over all of these here. Let's go along. So epithelial tissue, let's start with that first here, all right? So these are sheets of closely adhering cells, one or more cells that are thick with an upper surface exposed to the environment or internal space. So this covers like body surface and lines body cavities. Think about, we talk about also blood vessels, that epithelial lining of blood vessels. We know that when the epithelial lining of blood vessels starts to become stiff and not flexible, this is one of the indicators of leading to cardiovascular disease. And we know that through exercise, I'm an exercise guy, that exercise helps to create flexibility in that epithelial lining to keep blood vessels nice and healthy and malleable. So epithelial linings are really important within surfaces, lining of cavities. They also constitute most glands or secretion-based structures as well, and primarily avascular, so not having blood vessels themselves, but just lining those different areas as well. So they're usually nourished by underlying like connective tissue is where they get their nourishment from that. So the function of epithelial tissue has many functions. Protection being one of those things, protect deeper tissues from injuries, secretion, and, where you'll get to produce and release mucus, sweat, enzymes, hormones, all these other substances, which are really important, again, that play a larger role. What makes us us, and to create homeostasis is also a big aspect of this. The other part is excretion, so voiding waste from tissues is a really important aspect. And opposite of excretion, absorption, right? Absorbing chemicals, absorbing nutrients is really important part of this. Filtration is another aspect. And we get into filtration, especially when you talk about the urinary system, big filtration system. But thinking about epithelial tissue, all the substances leaving the body are selectively filtrated by the epithelium. So it's a big part of that system as well. Also, sensations for nerve endings is really important, and to detect stimuli around that. The general structure of the epithelia, again, very close together, small amount of extracellular material there, and it rests on a basement membrane, which is essentially a layer between the epithelium and underlying connective tissue. Remember that the epithelium gets its nutrients from that underlying connective tissue. So it's a really important aspect, this relationship between the epithelia and the connective tissue. So it serves as kind of a, I guess you could say, kind of an anchor mechanism for it as well. So really important. Um, so that's kind of a high level look of epithelia. And within that, we have other aspects like simple squamous epithelia, cuboidal, columnar, ciliated, all these different things. And gets a little more granular in here, but something you can get in a little bit further. One thing I always think is sometimes it's tough to get too deep into the weeds in a lot of these conversations. I want it to be more generalized overall, and that there's bigger takeaways. And so obviously there's deeper ways to dive into epithelia when looking at those different things, stratified epithelia, looking at keratinized, stratified, all these different things are deeper level, granular level things for you to look into, but also create just another level of depth when looking at this here. So let's kind of keep this on a higher level while getting somewhat depth here. So we're going to move into connective tissue. So connective tissue is the most abundant tissue. As I just mentioned, it nourishes the epithelial. For that, it's really widely distributed, and it's a variable type of tissue. And cells occupies less space than the matrix there. And in this case, most cells are not in direct contact with each other related to this. So you have highly variable vascularity in it as well, which I want to talk about coming up here. So loose connective tissues have many blood vessels versus cartilage, which has no blood vessels. So I want you to think about this. Think about different parts of your body. Some are more vascular and some are more avascular, right? So think about the inside of your mouth. Have you ever cut the inside of your mouth before? I have. I had braces when I was a kid. And I used to hate when the braces would it sounds gross, but they would rip into the inside of my mouth and the tissue in there, and it would bleed, but I would always notice that it would heal so quickly. And that's because that area is so vascular. It's getting a huge blood supply, which equals oxygen, creates more healing. Now think about when someone tears their anterior cruciate ligament, right? Or there's the cartilaginous area, cartilage having no blood supply, no direct blood supply. The reason why it takes so long to heal is because of that lack blood supply. Blood equals healing. Right? And without a direct blood supply, it's very difficult to have healing happening pretty quickly. So that's why you often get people when they tear their ACL, PCL, all those different things. These are 6 to 8 months, sometimes longer injuries for recover, primarily because of the lack of blood supply for that. So something interesting for you to have to know about here. So let's talk about the function of connective tissue. So connective tissue helps to bind organs, connects one bone to another, muscles to bones, to skin to muscle, and holds organs in place as well, along with some visceral fat that we'll talk about a little bit later too. It has a support function, so it supports the body, supports its organs, forms an internal framework of organs as well. It has physical protection to cushion delicate organs as well, and it has an immune protection response. So connective tissue cells also work to attack foreign invaders, pathogens that come that way as well. So other functions of connective tissue are probably what you're used to, which is like movement, right? So bones provide the lever system for the body, and cartilage is basically involved in that as well. But movement, that lever system is important For that, the storage maintains storage fat for calcium, phosphorus as well, generates heat, which obviously when you're moving, all of a sudden that generates more heat with that as well. Metabolism of brown fat generates heat. The brown fat is actually found much more in embryonic cells in children, infants, not much in adults. Adults have a very large portion of white fat, again, which we'll talk about that too. And connective tissues also serve as a transport mechanism. They're transporting blood, gases, nutrients, waste, hormones, blood cells. All these different aspects are part of it as well. Other parts of connective tissue we have is fibrous connective tissue, right? So we have fibroblasts, macrophages, leukocytes involved in white blood cells, plasma cells, which arise from lymphocytes and synthesize antibodies, mast cells, and then adipocytes, which are fat cells as well. Again, going down further down, kind of the rabbit hole here, you'll see that we have collagenous fibers, reticular fibers, elastic fibers. And so our collagenous fibers, these are more of your tough, flexible, stretch resistant. These would be called like your white fibers, due to the appearance of look like more like fresh tissue. Tendons, ligaments, deep layers of skin are mostly collagenous on that. So again, tendons, ligaments, deep layers of skin are mostly collagenous. Your reticular fibers would be more of like your thin collagen fibers. These are like form the framework for like the spleen, lymph nodes, part of the basement membranes under the epithelia. We also have elastic fibers. Those are thinner, more collagenous fibers. Those are more made of like elastin. And you may have heard of this stuff, especially with like plastic surgery and things of that nature with it. So this is what you see on this level. Then we also have tendons, ligaments as well with this. Again, I want to make sure we're keeping this not super granular, but kind of hit the high points as well with this. So one type of tissue to really think about is adipose tissue, right? Adipose tissue is fat tissue. And this is the tissue in which adipocytes are the dominant cell type here. So the space between adipocytes is occupied by areolar tissue, reticular tissue, and blood capillaries as well. And fat is the body's primary energy reservoir. I didn't say primary source of energy, but the primary reservoir holding tank for this. So the quantity of stored triglyceride, number of adipocytes are pretty stable in most people for that. And your fat is always recycled continuously with that. So something interesting to know about that. As I mentioned a little bit before, the difference between white and brown fat in humans, we have both. We have both white, which is primarily dominant in adults, brown fat, which is primarily dominant in embryonic cells, children, infants, things of that nature. So adults just have a much smaller deposit of it. And this function as kind of a heat generating tissue with that. All right, so as we go on to cartilage, and I talked a little bit about cartilage before and how it's avascular. And because of that, healing time takes so much longer because of the lack of vascularity. And I think that this is something that's really, I want to say, obvious to a lot of people if you really think about it. I remember that I broke my wrist when I was, gosh, how old was I? I was, I think, in seventh or eighth grade. And I was going up for a rebound in my front yard. We had a basketball hoop that was out on the street, and I was playing with a friend of mine. I came down with my hand. My hand hits the ground. I mean, it was gross, man. It was like my wrist was up here, and my hand was up here. My wrist was down here. It was just gelatinous there. And in that area, obviously, while there's a blood supply, it's not super vascular. So it took a while for it to heal once it was reset. Again, those who have experienced knee issues, particularly cartilaginous-based knee issues, because of the lack of blood supply, you're just really not going to see a very long recovery time, for that because of the lack of vascularity. So cartilage essentially is very stiff, okay? It's stiff connective tissue. You think of cartilage tendons, you may feel that in your leg going towards your knee, that stiffness. It feels kind of like you have this if you reach onto the side, moving more laterally for your quadriceps, if you go up to the side, your tensor fasciolates over there, you feel that tendinous portion going on beside your knee there, again, more laterally, that is a stiff connective tissue. That stiffness is really important, but also to have make sure that has a flexible nature to it within this rubbery matrix. So your cartilage gives shape to a lot of things, your nose, your ears, tip of your nose, actually your larynx as well as part of that to think about. So cartilage is in quite a few places within your body. Secondly, so again, I talked about it being avascular because there's no blood capillaries that go there. So this basically, through the process of diffusion, brings in nutrients and removes waste. So important to think about that when you are injured. Actually, one of the worst things you could do is do nothing. And now that may be part of the healing treatment plan if it's a really devastating injury, you're bedbound. But if you're able to move, movement is critically important, especially in the lymphatic system, which has no pump, and you need to be able to move gunk throughout the system, moving lymph throughout the system, decreasing the opportunity for lymphedema, that swelling and fluid buildup. And the same thing, because it's very avascular, you need that diffusion, you need the muscular pump in order to help remove nutrients, to bring nutrients, remove waste to help for the healing aspect, because you're not getting that without any direct blood supply for that. So again, you're healing really slowly for that. Then this area, let's talk about some types of cartilage. So hyaline cartilage is really important as this is kind of your glassy appearance cartilage. This helps for ease of movement for joints. So actually, when you exercise regularly, you help to lubricate those joints, the hyaline cartilage better. It improves that lubrication. Lack of movement actually decreases the lubrication over time. So another real tip of the cap and feather in the cap for exercise and how important it really is for that. You also have elastic cartilage, and this is containing a bunch of elastic fibers. This provides flexible, elastic support to structures, which they can stretch and then come back to their original shape as well. So we're on this issue, we're talking about bones here. And bones are really important, obviously, because they are the levers for movement, but is a calcified connective tissue that composes the skeleton. Bone is always forming or depositing bone and making new bone. You're always making new bone and depositing old bone for that. It's the process of osteoclast and osteoblast. Osteoblast being building, osteoclast crashing. Think about it. Blast, build, class, crash for that. Two types of bone, spongy, compact bone. Your spongy bone is your more porous bone. You're able to a little bit see through it, whereas compact is not. There's no visible seeing through it. And this is really found like the spongy bone is like the heads of long bones, middle of flat bones. Think about like your sternum. There's some spongy bone there. Compact bone is more denser, calcified tissue, no visible spaces. This forms external surfaces of all bones for that. So remember the difference, spongy versus compact bone. Also part of bones is blood, which is obviously an important aspect to it. Blood is fluid connective tissue that travels through tubular blood vessels. Epithelia lining those blood vessels, which are really important to remember that too. Contains formed elements in there suspended in liquid ground substance called blood plasma, right? This forms the basis for erythrocytes, which are red blood cells, and erythropoietin is produced in the kidney. And in the kidneys, erythropoietin is produced in response to the need for more oxygen carrying capacity. You also have with this was leukocytes, which are white blood cells, and this defends against infection and disease for that. Then you also have platelets, which are part of it. And these are cell fragments involved in clotting. So erythrocytes, leukocytes, platelets are also part of blood when you think about that as well. All right, let's look at nervous and muscular tissues, right? So a nervous tissue is more of the excitable tissues, right? They have ability to respond to stimuli and changing like membrane potential. Okay, so these are developed to the highest degree, and nervous and muscular tissues, they are called excitable tissues, very excitable tissues. And this is found, the excitability is based off of voltage. This is a charge differential here across the membrane, causing membrane potential. So in nerve cells, Changes in voltage results in rapid transmission of signals to other cells. Let me say that again. So changes in voltage result in rapid changes or transmission of signals to other cells. So in muscle cells, changes in voltage result in contraction and shortening of the cell. What happens actually when you fatigue tremendously and you feel like you can't do anymore, you've gone to such failure with exercise, you're losing that contractibility, that excitability. You're no longer receiving the signal across the neuromuscular junction, acetylcholine. It's not being produced anymore. You no longer have that. We're not breaking down ATP to ADP for the causing muscular contraction. Okay, so that excitability is done when we've reached the end of that excitability for that. So essentially, we look at nervous tissue as more a communication by electrical and chemical signals. Okay, so we have neurons, which are nerve cells, and we have glial cells, which protect and assist neurons, and neurons are detecting stimuli, and they respond quickly and transmit coded information that rapidly get communicated to other cells. So remember, again, your tissues are responsible for tremendous amounts of communication that literally, looking at myself, are literally happening constantly, literally all the time. While I'm moving my hands here, all of this is happening while I'm talking about it. My nervous tissue is excitable. It's causing muscular contraction. Now, because moving my fingers is a steady state contraction, I'm not going to get tired of doing that. I'm not running out of the process of producing more energy. It's always excitable. Unless I was to do this to absolute fatigue and I'm losing the signal, I'd no longer be doing that with that. So it's really important to understand nerve cells, glial cells. Within that, muscular tissue, when we look at muscular tissue, this is probably a tissue that is a little more not understandable, but recognizable for most people because you're looking at muscular tissue like skeletal muscular tissue. We're looking at cardiac and smooth. So remember, skeletal tissue, cardiac, and smooth. Some big differences in that. And your skeletal muscle tissue is voluntary, meaning that you are actually making it happen. I'm making my hands open like this. Cardiac muscle tissue, imagine if you had to control it. It's one of the only things in your body that's literally working all the time. It's beating for you nonstop. There's nothing you have to do. That cardiac center does that. It takes care of that. And then we also have smooth muscles there, see, involuntary. So much of what we do is involuntary, not under our thoughtful control, but is involuntary. Where a skeletal muscle, which is happening what I'm doing right now, if I'm doing a bicep curl, I press anything right now, that's under my control through skeletal tissue. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So made up mostly of muscle fibers, long thin cells, and most skeletal muscle tissue attaches to a bone. Contains multiple nuclei and striations with it, whereas something like cardiac muscle fiber is just limited to the heart wall, which makes sense, right? Cardiac, heart. We have cardiomyocytes are short, and they're branched with one centrally located nucleus with that as well. Our smooth muscle is also involuntary, just like our cardiac muscle, but they're made of short fusiform shaped cells, okay? Short fusiform shaped cells. Cells have one central nucleus, no striation. So we're trying to make differences like what is voluntary, what is involuntary, okay? What has a central nucleus, what doesn't here. Those things are differentiating factors for that. Within that, we also have glands, which are a cell or organ that secretes substances for use elsewhere in the body, or it releases them from elimination from the body. So we have a secretion and excretion. Secretion, excretion. Secretion is a product useful to the body. Excretion is a waste product. Secretions useful to the body. Excretion, a waste product. Okay? So we look at this, if we were to look at the endocrine system, this plays out pretty hardcore here. We have endocrine glands, we have exocrine glands, and endocrine glands. Right? Exocrine, remember exo, out, okay, maintain their contact with the surface of epithelium by way of ducts. So the surface out, away by ducts, right? So the surface can be external, kind of like sweat glands, tear glands. Think of these exocrine, outside. These are more the things connected to external surfaces, sweat glands, tear glands, things of that night. Endocrine, right? Think of endocrine, endo, have no ducts, do have many blood capillaries more inside, endo. They secrete hormones directly into the blood for that. So think about words have meanings, right? Exo, like exoskeleton, outside skeleton, exo, exit, outside, direct connection to the surface. Endo, inside, right? Direction for the blood supply here. So think about endocrine glands, the more hormonal glands. These things are happening inside, chemical messengers that stimulate something elsewhere in the body. So, for example, like your thyroid gland, adrenal, pituitary glands. It's also another thing related to that. All right, let's keep moving on. So, as we get closer here towards the end, we're looking at something such as like tissue growth. Okay, so tissues grow by increasing the number of cell size or the size of the existing cell. So something like hyperplasia is growth through cell multiplication. Hyper, right, versus hyper, more excitable, hypo, less excitable, hyperplasia. This would be like most embryonic cells and childhood growth, hyperplasia, growth in tissue there. Cell multiplication. And then you have hypertrophy, which is growth in like muscle size. You're probably familiar with this maybe through exercise. When you add an external stimulus to skeletal muscle tissue and you provide enough of a stimulus to cause a change, there's some damage that caused there, you have an increase in muscle size. So this is an enlargement also of pre-existing cells. So again, this occurs through muscle growth through exercise. This doesn't happen just out of nowhere. There has to be an external stimulus, which often could be initially just your own body weight, but over time you're going to need something enough of a stimulus that's greater than what you're used to in order to produce hypertrophy. Big exercise discussion here. This is an exercise class, but it is a nice complement for that as well to think about that. All right, guys. So that's pretty much a nice, quick, and fast understanding of tissues and tissue types. You get a little bit about some hormonal aspects as well here, but that microscopic study of tissues tells us so much about the body, what's happening inside. And I hope that this is interesting for you and that you took a lot from this. I always appreciate you guys listening and checking in with me. I truly appreciate you.